The blood on Willa Bradford's hands had dried hours ago, but she could still feel its weight as she stumbled into White Oaks, New Mexico, with nothing but the torn dress on her back and desperation clawing at her throat. It was late September in 1882, and the desert sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty Main Street as Willa's bare feet touched the wooden planks of the town's entrance. She had walked 17 miles through scrub, brush, and sand, fleeing from the smoking remains of the homestead where her father had died protecting her from the men who wanted their land. The gunshots still echoed in her mind, and the image of her father's final breath would haunt her forever. She was 21 years old, completely alone in the world, and had nowhere left to run. White Oaks was a mining town, thriving on silver and gold, full of prospectors and cowboys and the kind of rough men who came west to escape their pasts. Willa knew she looked like a ghost as she walked down the main street, her blonde hair matted with dust and blood, her blue eyes hollow with exhaustion. People stared, but no one approached. She didn't blame them. She probably looked half mad. The general store stood at the corner of the street, its painted sign faded by sun and wind. Willa's vision blurred as she reached for the door handle, but her legs gave out before she could grasp it. She felt herself falling, waiting for the impact of the hard wooden planks, but instead found herself caught by strong arms that smelled of leather and sage. "Easy there, miss," a deep voice said above her head. "I've got you." Willa looked up into the most striking pair of green eyes she had ever seen. The man holding her was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that touched his collar, and a face weathered by sun and hard living. He wore dusty riding clothes and a gun belt slung low on his hips, but his touch was gentle as he steadied her against him. "I'm sorry," Willa whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean to." "No apologies needed," the man said. He had a slight accent she couldn't quite place, maybe from somewhere back east. "Let's get you inside, out of this heat." He guided her through the door of the general store, and the proprietor, a balding man with spectacles, looked up from his ledger with concern. "Good Lord, Thomas, what happened to her?" "Don't know yet, Mr. Henderson," the man called Thomas replied. He helped Willa into a chair near the counter and crouched down in front of her, his eyes searching her face. "Can you tell us your name, Willa?" she managed. "Willa Bradford." "My father's homestead was attacked. He's dead. I walked here from Sand Creek." Thomas's expression darkened. "Sand Creek, that's 17 miles from here. You walked all that way alone," Willa nodded, feeling tears burn her eyes for the first time since she had started running. "They killed him." "They wanted our land, said my father owed money, but he didn't. He never borrowed from anyone. They were lying, and when he wouldn't sign over the deed, they shot him." "Who were they?" Thomas asked, his voice hard now. "I don't know their names. 3 men. One had a scar across his cheek. Another was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. The third one wore a black hat with a silver band." Willa's hands trembled as she spoke. "My father told me to run. I hid in the root cellar while they searched the house. When they set it on fire, I waited until they rode off. Then I tried to save him, but it was too late. The smoke was everywhere, and he was already gone." Mr. Henderson poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink this slowly, miss. You're dehydrated." Willa took the cup with shaking hands and sipped the water. It was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street with a tent set to his shoulders. "Those men sound like Jack Mercer's gang," he said quietly. "They've been terrorizing homesteaders in the territory for months now, buying up land cheap after they scare people off. The sheriff in Lincoln County knows about them but says he doesn't have jurisdiction out here." "What do I do?" Willa asked, her voice breaking. "I have nothing left. No home, no family, no money, Everything burned with the house. Thomas turned back to face her, and something in his expression softened. First thing, you need food and rest. Then we figure out what comes next. I can't pay you, Willa said desperately. I don't have anything to offer you. Not even thanks seems like enough. Thomas crossed the room and knelt in front of her again, and when he spoke, his voice was firm but kind. You have everything I need. Willa blinked at him, confused. What? The truth about what happened, Thomas said. A witness who can testify against Mercer's gang. Someone brave enough to walk 17 miles through the desert rather than give up. That takes more courage than most men I know possess. He stood and held out his hand to her. My name is Thomas Parker. I'm a ranch hand at the Diamond Cross Ranch, about 5 miles north of town. My boss, Mrs. Sarah Chen, she's always looking for help around the place. You could stay there, work for room and board until you figure out what you want to do next. Why would you help me? Willa asked, staring at his outstretched hand. You don't know me. Because it's the right thing to do, Thomas said simply. And because I know what it's like to have nothing and need someone to take a chance on you. Willa looked into his eyes and saw genuine kindness there, something she hadn't expected to find in a rough mining town full of strangers. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. His palm was calloused but warm, and when his fingers closed around hers, she felt something shift in her chest, a tiny spark of hope in the darkness that had consumed her. Thank you, she whispered. Thomas helped her to her feet. Mr. Henderson, could you put together some supplies on my account? Food, water, and maybe some clothes that might fit Miss Bradford, the shopkeeper nodded immediately. Of course, Thomas. Give me just a few minutes. While Mr. Henderson gathered supplies, Thomas led Willa to a small bench outside the store, in the shade of the overhang. The town was busy with afternoon activity. Miners trudged past with their tools, cowboys rode by on dusty horses, and women in calico dresses hurried along the wooden sidewalks with baskets on their arms. How long have you lived here? Willa asked, needing to focus on something other than the memories that threatened to overwhelm her. About 3 years now, Thomas said, leaning against the post beside the bench. Came west from Virginia after the war ended. Well, long after. Spent some years drifting before I landed here. The war, Willa did the math in her head. You must have been young. 17 when I enlisted, Thomas said, a shadow crossing his face. Too young to understand what I was signing up for. Lost my whole family during those years. My parents died of fever. My brother was killed at Antietam. When it was over, there was nothing left to go back to, so I kept moving west. I'm sorry, Willa said softly. Thomas looked at her, and a small smile tugged at his lips. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both orphaned, both starting over. How old are you now? Willa asked. 28, Thomas replied. And you? 21. Thomas nodded. You're young to be facing all this alone, but you're stronger than you think, Miss Bradford. Most people would have collapsed in the desert. You made it all the way here. I didn't have a choice, Willa said. It was walk or die. There's always a choice, Thomas said. You chose to live. That matters. Mr. Henderson emerged from the store carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper and a canteen. Here you are, Thomas. I included some jerky, hardtack, dried fruit, and a dress that should fit Miss Bradford. There's also a blanket and a coat for the evenings. It gets cold out here at night. Thank you kindly, Thomas said, taking the bundle. He handed it to Willa. Why don't you go back inside and change? There's a small room in the back you can use. Take your time. Willa accepted the bundle gratefully and retreated into the store. The back room was dusty and filled with crates, but it offered privacy. She unwrapped the dress and found it was a simple blue cotton garment, much plainer than anything she had owned before, but it was clean and whole. She stripped off her ruined dress and washed her face and hands with water from a basin Mr. Henderson had left on a crate. The dried blood came off slowly, and she had to scrub hard to remove it all. When she looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror hanging on the wall, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her face was gaunt, her eyes too large, her hair a tangled mess. She looked like someone who had walked through hell and barely survived. But she had survived. That was what mattered. Willa braided her hair as best she could and put on the blue dress. It fit reasonably well, a little loose in the waist but otherwise acceptable. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and picked up the coat, then returned to the front of the store. Thomas was waiting outside, and when he saw her, something shifted in his expression. "You clean up nice, Miss Bradford." "I look like a scarecrow," Willa said, but she managed a small smile. "But at least I'm a clean scarecrow now." "My horse is tied up at the saloon," Thomas said. "It's not far. Do you think you can walk there, or should I bring him here?" "I can walk," Willa said. She had walked 17 miles already. What was another 100 yards? They made their way down the street together, and Willa noticed how people's eyes followed them. She supposed they made an odd pair, the dusty cowboy and the haunted woman in borrowed clothes. But Thomas walked beside her with an easy confidence that made her feel protected, as if his presence alone could shield her from the harsh judgments of strangers. The saloon was called the Lucky Strike, and several horses were tied to the hitching post outside. Thomas's mount was a big bay gelding with kind eyes and a white star on his forehead. "This is Copper," Thomas said, untying the reins. "He's gentle as a lamb. You'll ride with me. It's too far to walk, especially after what you've been through." Thomas swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, then reached down for Willa. She hesitated for just a moment, then took his hand and let him pull her up behind him. She had to sit side saddle, her arms wrapped around his waist to keep her balance, and the closeness felt both strange and comforting. "Hold on tight," Thomas said. "We'll take it slow." They rode out of White Oaks heading north, and the desert landscape stretched out around them in shades of gold and rust. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Despite everything that had happened, Willa couldn't help but notice the beauty of it. "What's Mrs. Chen like?" Willa asked as they rode, needing to distract herself from the warmth of Thomas's body against hers and the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them. "She's one of the toughest women I've ever met," Thomas said. "Her husband died 5 years ago, leaving her with a ranch to run and 3 children to raise. Most people thought she'd sell and move back east, but she proved them all wrong. Built the Diamond Cross into one of the most successful ranches in the territory. She's fair and honest, and she doesn't suffer fools." "Will she really give me work?" Willa asked. "If I vouch for you, yes," Thomas said. "Sarah trusts my judgment, and we genuinely do need help. The ranch has been growing, and we're short-handed, especially now that roundup season is coming." They rode in silence for a while, and Willa found herself noticing small things about Thomas. The way he sat in the saddle with natural grace, the gentle way he handled the reins, the warmth that radiated from him even through his shirt. She tried not to think about how long it had been since she had felt safe, how long since anyone had shown her genuine kindness. The Diamond Cross Ranch appeared on the horizon just as the sun touched the edge of the world. It was a sprawling complex of buildings, including a large main house, several barns, corrals full of horses and cattle, and what looked like bunkhouses for the ranch hands. Everything was well maintained and orderly, speaking to the skill of whoever managed it. Thomas rode up to the main house and dismounted, then helped Willa down. Her legs were shaky after the ride, and she had to hold onto his arm for a moment to steady herself. "Wait here," Thomas said. "I'll fetch Mrs. Chen." He disappeared inside the house, and Willa stood in the yard, feeling suddenly nervous. What if Mrs. Chen didn't want to help her? What if she thought Willa was trouble? What if Thomas had overestimated his boss's generosity? But when the door opened again and a woman stepped out, Willa's fears eased slightly. Sarah Chen was in her mid-40s, with black hair streaked with gray pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple dress covered by an apron, and her dark eyes were sharp and assessing but not unkind. "Miss Bradford," Mrs. Chen said, her voice carrying a hint of an accent that suggested she had been born somewhere far from New Mexico. "Thomas has told me about your situation. I'm very sorry for your loss." "Thank you, madam," Willa said quietly. Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment. "Thomas says you need work and a place to stay. I can offer you both, but I need to know what skills you have. Can you cook?" "Yes, madam. My mother taught me before she died when I was 12. I've been cooking for my father and myself since then." "Can you sew, mend clothes, do laundry?" "Yes, madam." "Can you handle chickens, milk cows, tend a garden?" "Yes, madam. I did all of that at our homestead." Mrs. Chen nodded, seeming satisfied. "Good. I need help with the domestic work around the ranch." "My daughter Emily tries, but she's only 14 and would rather be out riding with the cowboys. I can offer you room and board in the main house, plus a small wage. 50 cents a day to start, more if you prove reliable. Does that suit you?" 50 cents a day was more than Willa had expected. "Yes, madam. That's very generous." "It's fair," Mrs. Chen corrected. "I don't believe in charity, Miss Bradford. You'll work hard for that money and you'll earn every penny, but you'll be treated with respect and you'll have a safe place to sleep and regular meals. Those are worth more than money sometimes." "Yes, madam," Willa said, feeling tears threaten again. "I can't thank you enough." "Thank Thomas," Mrs. Chen said with a slight smile. "He's the one who vouched for you. Come inside. I'll show you where you'll sleep and introduce you to my children." "Thomas, thank you for bringing Miss Bradford. Make sure Copper is fed and watered before you head to the bunkhouse." "Yes, madam," Thomas said. He caught Willa's eye and gave her a small, encouraging smile before leading his horse toward the barn. Willa followed Mrs. Chen into the house and immediately felt overwhelmed by the warmth and homeliness of it. The main room was large and comfortable, with furniture that looked well used but cared for. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the smell of cooking meat wafted from the kitchen. 3 children sat at a long wooden table doing what appeared to be schoolwork. "Children, this is Miss Willa Bradford," Mrs. Chen announced. "She'll be helping me around the house from now on. Willa, these are my children. Emily is 14, James is 11, and little Margaret is 8. Emily was a pretty girl with her mother's dark hair and eyes, and she looked up from her book with undisguised curiosity. James had lighter hair and freckles, probably taking after his late father, and he offered Willa a shy smile. Margaret was a tiny thing with braids and a gap-toothed grin. "Hello," Willa said, feeling suddenly shy herself. "Did you really walk 17 miles through the desert?" Emily asked, her eyes wide. "Emily Manners," Mrs. Chen said sharply. "It's all right," Willa said. "Yes, I did." "That's incredible," Emily breathed. "I want to hear all about it." "Maybe another time," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Miss Bradford needs rest and food. Emily, show her to the spare room upstairs and help her get settled. The rest of you finish your work before supper." Emily jumped up eagerly and beckoned for Willa to follow her. They climbed a narrow staircase to the second floor, where several bedrooms opened off a central hallway. Emily led Willa to a small room at the end of the hall. It contained a narrow bed with a quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, a small chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. "It's not much," Emily said apologetically, But it's clean and private, better than the bunkhouse anyway. It's wonderful, Willa said honestly. After sleeping on the ground in the root cellar and walking all day through the desert, the small room looked like paradise. Thomas is nice, isn't he? Emily said with a knowing smile. He's been working here for 2 years. All the girls in town are crazy about him, but he never pays them any attention. Mama says he's married to his work. He was very kind to me today, Willa said carefully. He's kind to everyone, Emily said. But I saw the way he looked at you when he rode up. That was different. Emily, you're imagining things, Willa said, but her heart skipped a beat. Maybe, Emily said with a grin. But I don't think so. Anyway, supper will be ready in about an hour. You should rest. You look exhausted. After Emily left, Willa sat on the bed and finally allowed herself to fully feel the weight of everything that had happened. Her father was dead. Her home was destroyed. Everything she had known was gone. She should have been completely shattered, should have been curled up sobbing with grief and despair. But instead, she found herself thinking about green eyes and a gentle voice saying, "You have everything I need." She didn't understand it. She didn't understand why Thomas had helped her, why he had brought her here, why he had looked at her with such warmth when she was nothing but a stranger covered in dust and blood. But she was grateful for it, grateful in a way that went beyond words. Willa lay back on the bed and closed her eyes just for a moment, just to rest. She woke to Emily shaking her shoulder gently. "Miss Bradford, Willa, supper's ready." Willa sat up, disoriented. Darkness pressed against the window and lamplight flickered in the hallway. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to fall asleep." "You needed it," Emily said kindly. "Come on, everyone's waiting." Willa followed Emily downstairs to find the table set with simple but plentiful food. Mrs. Chen sat at the head of the table with her children on one side. To Willa's surprise, Thomas sat on the other side, along with 2 other men who were introduced as ranch hands named Samuel and Diego. "We all eat together here," Mrs. Chen explained, gesturing for Willa to sit in the empty chair next to Thomas. "I don't hold with separating the help from the family. We're all working toward the same goal." Willa sat down, acutely aware of Thomas beside her. He had cleaned up since bringing her to the ranch, his face freshly washed and his hair damp. He smelled like soap and hay, and when he glanced at her, his smile was warm. "Feeling better?" he asked quietly. "Yes, thank you," Willa replied. Mrs. Chen said grace, and then everyone dug into the meal of roasted beef, potatoes, beans, and fresh bread. Willa tried to eat slowly and with manners, but she was so hungry that it was difficult. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning before the attack. "Thomas told us about what happened to your father," Mrs. Chen said as they ate. "It's a terrible thing. Jack Mercer and his gang are a plague on this territory. Someone needs to stop them." "The law won't help," Diego said. He was a stocky man with a thick mustache and a heavy Spanish accent. "They are too afraid or too corrupt. What we need is a federal marshal," Samuel said. He was younger, maybe 25, with sandy hair and a serious expression. "Someone with real authority who can't be bought off." "There's talk of one coming through next month," Mrs. Chen said. "A marshal named John Hayes. He's been cleaning up some of the other territories. Maybe he'll take an interest in our situation. If Miss Bradford is willing to testify about what she saw, that would help," Thomas said, looking at Willa. "But I wouldn't ask her to put herself in danger." "I'll testify," Willa said immediately. "My father deserves justice." "You're brave, Mrs. Chen said approvingly. "But Thomas is right. We need to keep you safe until the marshal arrives. Mercer's gang doesn't leave witnesses alive if they can help it. If they find out you survived, they'll come looking for you." A chill ran down Willa's spine. She hadn't thought about that. She had been so focused on surviving, on getting away, that she hadn't considered the possibility that the men who killed her father might come after her. "She'll be safe here," Thomas said firmly. "We'll make sure of it." The certainty in his voice made Willa feel better, though she knew it was probably foolish to trust a man she had just met. But there was something about Thomas that made her feel protected, something solid and reliable that she desperately needed right now. After supper, the children were sent to bed and the ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse. Willa helped Mrs. Chen clean up the dishes, learning the layout of the kitchen and the routine of the household. When everything was put away, Mrs. Chen poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured for Willa to sit at the table. "I want you to know that you're welcome here for as long as you need," Mrs. Chen said. "But I also want to be honest with you. This is a working ranch and life here isn't easy. The work is hard, the hours are long, and there's always something that needs doing. If you're not prepared for that, it's better to say so now." "I'm prepared," Willa said. "I've worked hard my whole life. I'm not afraid of it." Mrs. Chen nodded. "Good. We'll start you with indoor work, cooking and cleaning and laundry. Once you're settled and feeling stronger, we might add other tasks. Does that sound acceptable?" "Yes, madam. More than acceptable." "One more thing," Mrs. Chen said, her eyes shrewd. "Thomas is a good man, one of the best I've ever known. He's been through hell and back, and he deserves to find some happiness. I saw the way he looked at you today, and I saw the way you looked at him. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life, but I will say this: be careful with his heart. He may seem tough, but he's more fragile than he lets on." Willa felt her cheeks flush. "Mrs. Chen, I don't think—" "You don't have to say anything," Mrs. Chen interrupted gently. "Just keep it in mind. Now you should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Willa climbed the stairs to her little room, her mind spinning. She undressed and washed in the cold water from the pitcher, then crawled into bed wearing the clean nightgown Mrs. Chen had provided. The bed was soft and warm, the quilt smelling of lavender, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Willa felt safe. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face, heard the gunshots, smelled the smoke. She saw the 3 men on horseback, heard their laughter as they rode away. She saw Thomas's green eyes, felt his arms catching her as she fell. Finally, exhausted beyond measure, Willa drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, she woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and the smell of coffee. Pale dawn light filtered through her window, and she could hear movement downstairs. Willa dressed quickly in her borrowed blue dress and hurried down to the kitchen. Mrs. Chen was already up, starting breakfast. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "As well as could be expected," Willa said honestly. "The first few days are always the hardest," Mrs. Chen said. "But it gets easier, I promise. Now let me show you how we do breakfast around here. We feed everyone at 6 o'clock sharp. That means cooking for 9 people every morning, so we need to be efficient." Willa threw herself into the work, grateful for something to occupy her hands and mind. She helped Mrs. Chen prepare eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy, setting the table and pouring coffee. When the ranch hands and children filed in at 6 o'clock, everything was ready. Thomas was the last to arrive, and when he saw Willa in an apron serving food, he smiled. "Morning, Miss Bradford." "Morning, Mr. Parker," Willa replied, feeling inexplicably shy. "How are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you." The days began to fall into a routine. Willa woke before dawn to help with breakfast, then spent the morning cleaning and doing laundry. In the afternoons, she helped prepare supper and mended clothes or worked in the kitchen garden. The work was hard, as Mrs. Chen had promised, but it was also satisfying. Willa liked having structure, liked feeling useful, and she liked seeing Thomas every day at meals. He was always kind, always respectful, but Willa began to notice little things. The way his eyes would seek her out when he entered a room. The way he always seemed to position himself near her at the table. The way he found excuses to talk to her, asking about her day or telling her stories about the ranch. A week after Willa's arrival, Thomas approached her after breakfast. "Miss Bradford, I was wondering if you might like to go for a walk this evening after supper. There's a creek about a mile from here that's real pretty at sunset. I thought you might enjoy seeing it." Willa's heart fluttered. "I'd like that very much." Emily, who had been clearing dishes nearby, grinned at them both but said nothing. That evening, after the supper dishes were washed and put away, Willa changed into her only dress and met Thomas in the yard. He had a horse saddled and ready. "I figured you might be tired of walking," he said with a smile. "We can ride together if that's all right." "Of course," Willa said. Thomas helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her this time, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. It felt different than the first time they had ridden together, more intimate somehow. Willa was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. They rode slowly through the gathering dusk, and Thomas pointed out features of the landscape, telling her about the ranch and the work they did there. He had a good voice for storytelling, deep and warm, and Willa found herself relaxing against him. The creek was exactly as beautiful as he had promised. It cut through a small canyon, the water clear and cold, reflecting the orange and pink of the sunset sky. Cottonwood trees grew along the banks, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. Thomas helped Willa down from the horse and they walked along the creek bank, not quite touching but close enough that Willa could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said. "It's peaceful." "I come here sometimes when I need to think," Thomas said. "There's something about running water that helps clear your head." "You need to clear your head often?" Willa asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. I think a lot about the past, about the things I've seen and done. The war taught me things about human nature I wish I didn't know. Coming west was supposed to help me leave all that behind, but you can't really escape yourself, can you?" "No," Willa agreed quietly. "I keep thinking about my father, wondering if there was something I could have done differently, some way I could have saved him." "There wasn't," Thomas said firmly. "From what you described, those men would have killed you both if you tried to fight. Your father knew that. He saved your life by telling you to hide." "I know that in my head," Willa said, "but my heart still feels guilty." Thomas stopped walking and turned to face her. In the fading light, his eyes were very green and very serious. "Willa, can I tell you something?" It was the first time he had used her first name, and the sound of it on his lips made her breath catch. "Yes." "When I found you in town that day, you looked like you had walked through fire. But you were still standing, still fighting. That's not something you see every day. Most people would have given up, would have let the desert take them, or just laid down and waited to die. But you didn't. You kept going." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I've met a lot of people in my life, Willa. Good people, bad people, strong people, weak people, but I've never met anyone quite like you." "You barely know me," Willa whispered. "I know enough," Thomas said. "I know you're brave and strong and determined. I know you loved your father enough to risk everything trying to save him. I know you're willing to testify against dangerous men to get justice for him. I know that when you smile, which isn't often enough, it lights up your whole face." He took a half step closer. "And I know that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment I caught you in my arms." Willa's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Thomas, You don't have to say anything," Thomas said quickly. "I know this is complicated. I know you're grieving and trying to figure out your life. I'm not trying to rush you or make things harder. I just wanted you to know how I feel. Because life's too short and too uncertain to leave things unsaid." I think about you too, Willa admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. All the time. And it confuses me because I should be focused on grieving my father, on figuring out what to do with my life. But instead, I find myself watching for you at meals and listening for your voice and thinking about the way you looked at me that first day. Thomas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her face in his calloused hand. There's no right or wrong way to grieve, Willa, and there's no rule that says you can't feel other things at the same time. The heart's big enough for both sorrow and hope. Willa leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. I'm scared. Of what? Of feeling too much too fast. Of trusting this when everything else in my life has fallen apart. Of losing someone else I care about. Those are all reasonable fears, Thomas said gently. But you can't let fear stop you from living. If I've learned anything, it's that life is precious and short, and we have to grab onto good things when we find them. Willa opened her eyes and looked up at him. Is this a good thing? Us? I think it could be, Thomas said, if we give it a chance. For a long moment they stood there in the fading light, his hand on her face, her eyes locked with his. Then, slowly, Thomas leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, nothing demanding or rushed, just a soft press of lips that somehow conveyed everything he felt. Willa's eyes fluttered closed and she kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat under her palm, strong and steady, and something tight and painful in her chest loosened just a little. When they finally pulled apart, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. Is this okay? Yes, Willa breathed. More than okay. They stood there for a while longer, watching the stars come out and listening to the creek murmur over stones, and for the first time since her father's death, Willa felt something other than grief. She felt possibility. The ride back to the ranch was quiet but comfortable. When they arrived, Thomas helped Willa down from the horse with obvious reluctance to let her go. Thank you for tonight, Willa said. Thank you for giving me a chance, Thomas replied. Over the following weeks, something beautiful began to grow between them. They were careful to be discreet, aware that gossip spread quickly on a ranch, but they found moments to be together. Early morning walks before breakfast, evening rides after supper, conversations in the barn while Thomas tended the horses and Willa collected eggs. They talked about everything. Thomas told her about growing up in Virginia, about his family and the farm they had owned. He told her about the war, though some memories were clearly painful, and he skipped over the worst parts. He told her about coming west, about learning to be a cowboy, about finding a place at the Diamond Cross. Willa told him about her childhood, about her mother who had died of consumption when Willa was 12. She told him about taking over the household, about learning to be strong when her father needed her to be. She told him about the homestead, about the garden she had planted and the chickens she had raised. She told him her dreams, the ones she had thought were lost forever. I always wanted to have a real home, she confessed one evening as they sat by the creek. Not just a homestead barely scratching out survival, but a real home with a proper house and a big kitchen and a garden full of flowers. I wanted a family, children of my own. I wanted to build something lasting. You can still have all that, Thomas said. Can I? Willa looked at him. I have nothing, Thomas. No land, no money, no family. Thomas took her hand. You have me if you want me, Willa's breath caught. Are you saying? I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you, Willa Bradford, Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. I'm saying that I want to build that home with you, have those children with you, create that lasting thing you dreamed about. I don't have much either. I've saved a little money working here, and Mrs. Chen has offered to sell me a parcel of land on the edge of the ranch property if I ever want to start my own place. We'd have to work hard, both of us, for years probably. but we could do it together." Tears streamed down Willa's face, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I'm falling in love with you too. It happened so fast I didn't even realize it at first. But somewhere between you catching me on that street and now, you became the most important person in my world." Thomas pulled her close and kissed her, and this kiss was different from the first. It was deeper, more passionate, full of promise and commitment. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Marry me," Thomas said. "I know it's soon, I know we should probably wait, but I don't want to. Life's too uncertain. I want to know you're mine and I'm yours." "Yes," Willa said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." Thomas let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she was laughing breathlessly. When he set her down, he kissed her again and again, until they were both dizzy with happiness. "We should tell Mrs. Chen," Willa said when they had calmed down enough to think practically. "Tomorrow," Thomas said. "Tonight, let's just be happy about this, just the two of us." They stayed by the creek until the moon was high, making plans and dreaming about the future. It felt surreal to Willa that just a few weeks ago she had lost everything, and now she had everything she had ever wanted within reach. The next morning, they approached Mrs. Chen together after breakfast. The older woman took one look at their faces and smiled. "You're getting married," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, madam," Thomas said. "With your permission, of course. I know Willa is under your employ and I don't want to cause any problems." "You have my permission and my blessing," Mrs. Chen said warmly. "I wondered how long it would take you two to figure it out. You've been making eyes at each other for weeks." Emily, who had been pretending not to listen while washing dishes, squealed with excitement. "I knew it. I told you, Willa. I told you he looked at you differently." Even the younger children congratulated them, and the ranch hands shook Thomas's hand with genuine happiness. It felt good to be surrounded by people who cared, who wanted them to be happy. "When's the wedding?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Soon," Thomas said. "We don't want to wait long." "How about 3 weeks from now?" Mrs. Chen suggested. "That gives us time to make proper arrangements, but not so long that you're both fidgeting with impatience. We can have the ceremony here at the ranch, and I'll provide a wedding supper for everyone." "That's too generous," Willa protested. "Nonsense," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Your family now, both of you. Family takes care of each other." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Willa continued her work around the ranch, but in her spare time she helped Mrs. Chen and Emily sew a simple white wedding dress from fabric Mrs. Chen purchased in town. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, with long sleeves and a high collar and tiny pearl buttons down the back. Thomas spent his evenings after work building furniture for the small cabin Mrs. Chen had agreed to let them live in, until they could build their own house on the land she was selling them. It was an old line shack about a quarter-mile from the main ranch buildings. Just one room with a fireplace and a loft, but Thomas worked hard to make it comfortable, building a proper bed frame and a table and chairs. Word of the wedding spread, and people from town began stopping by to offer congratulations and small gifts. Mr. Henderson from the general store gave them a set of dishes. The blacksmith made them a set of fireplace tools. Even people Willa had never met brought small tokens, a quilt, a set of candles, a bag of coffee beans. "People are good out here," Mrs. Chen explained when Willa expressed surprise at the generosity. "Life's hard in the territory, and we all know we need each other to survive. When something good happens, everyone celebrates it." There was only one shadow on their happiness. Marshal John Hayes had still not arrived, and there had been more reports of Jack Mercer's gang terrorizing homesteaders. Thomas worried about Willa's safety, insisting that she never go anywhere alone and always stay close to the ranch buildings. They don't know where you are, he assured her when he saw her looking anxious. And even if they did, they'd be fools to try anything here. We've got enough men to defend the place, and everyone knows it. I just want this to be over, Willa said. I want to testify, see them punished for what they did, and then move on with our lives. Soon, Thomas promised. The marshal will come and we'll make sure justice is served. The day before the wedding, Willa was helping Mrs. Chen prepare food for the celebration when a rider came thundering into the ranch yard. It was Samuel, who had been in town picking up supplies. "Mrs. Chen," he shouted, "the marshal's here. Marshal Hayes arrived this morning." Thomas, who had been working in the barn, came running. "Did you tell him about Willa?" "I did," Samuel said. "He wants to talk to her as soon as possible. He's setting up in the sheriff's office in town." "I'll take her," Thomas said immediately. "Be careful," Mrs. Chen warned. "Mercer has spies everywhere. If word gets out that Willa's testifying, he might try something." "We'll be careful," Thomas assured her. Within an hour, Thomas had a wagon hitched and ready. Mrs. Chen insisted on sending Diego along for extra protection, and both men wore their guns prominently displayed. Willa changed into her best dress and climbed into the wagon seat beside Thomas. The ride into White Oaks was tense. Thomas kept scanning the horizon, his hand never far from his gun. But they made it to town without incident and found the sheriff's office easily enough. Marshal John Hayes was a tall, lean man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes. He wore a badge on his vest and had the look of someone who had seen everything and wasn't easily impressed. "Miss Bradford," he said when Willa was ushered into his office. "Thank you for coming. I understand you witnessed the murder of your father and the destruction of your property by Jack Mercer's gang." "Yes, sir," Willa said. She was nervous, but Thomas's presence beside her gave her courage. For the next hour, Willa told the marshal everything she had seen and heard. She described the three men in detail, recounting their conversations, their actions, the way they had laughed as they burned her home. The marshal took careful notes, asking questions when he needed clarification. "This is good," he said when she was finished. "Very good. Your testimony, combined with the other evidence I've been gathering, should be enough to bring Mercer and his men to justice. But I need to warn you, Miss Bradford. Once word gets out that you're testifying, you'll be in danger. Mercer doesn't leave loose ends." "I'm not afraid," Willa said, though that wasn't entirely true. "You should be," the marshal said bluntly. "These are dangerous men. I'd recommend you stay somewhere safe until the trial. Do you have somewhere to go?" "She's staying at my ranch," Mrs. Chen said. She had insisted on coming into town with them and had been waiting outside. "We'll keep her safe." "I'm getting married tomorrow," Willa added, "to Thomas Parker. After that, we'll be living in a cabin on Mrs. Chen's property." The marshal looked at Thomas with new interest. "You willing to protect her, son?" "With my life," Thomas said without hesitation. "Good, you may need to." The marshal stood and shook hands with each of them. "The trial will be in 2 weeks. I'll send word when I need you to come back to town. Until then, stay alert and stay safe." They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, and despite the marshal's warnings, Willa felt relieved. Finally, the wheels of justice were turning. Finally, her father would get the justice he deserved. That night, Willa could barely sleep. Tomorrow, she was getting married. Tomorrow, she would become Willa Parker. Tomorrow, her new life would truly begin. She woke before dawn on her wedding day to find Emily sitting on the edge of her bed, grinning. "Wake up, it's your wedding day." The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Mrs. Chen and Emily helped Willa bathe and dress, styling her hair in an elegant twist with small white flowers tucked into it. When Willa looked at herself in the mirror, she hardly recognized the scared, desperate woman who had stumbled into White Oaks 5 weeks ago. The ceremony was held in the front yard of the ranch at noon, with everyone who lived and worked on the Diamond Cross in attendance, along with people from town who had come out to celebrate. The minister from the church in White Oaks performed the ceremony, and Willa walked toward Thomas on Mrs. Chen's arm since she had no father to give her away. Thomas stood waiting for her in his best clothes, his dark hair combed back, his green eyes bright with emotion. When he took her hand, Willa felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be. This was who she was meant to be with. They spoke their vows in clear, strong voices, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life brought them. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her softly, and everyone cheered. The celebration that followed was joyful and heartfelt. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast, and there was music and dancing and laughter. Willa danced with Thomas, with Diego, with Samuel, even with little James Chen, who stood on her feet and let her guide him around. As the sun began to set, Thomas pulled her aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Parker?" Willa smiled at the sound of her new name. "Yes, Mr. Parker, very ready." They said their goodbyes and walked hand in hand to the cabin that was now theirs. Thomas had strung lanterns around the porch, and their soft light made everything glow warmly. He opened the door, and before Willa could step inside, swept her up into his arms and carried her over the threshold. "Welcome home," he said, setting her down gently. Willa looked around the small cabin with joy. It was simple, but Thomas had made it cozy. There was a fire crackling in the fireplace, the bed was made with fresh linens and the quilt Mrs. Chen had given them, and wildflowers sat in a jar on the table. "It's perfect," Willa breathed. Thomas came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I want to give you everything, Willa. Everything you ever dreamed of. It won't happen overnight, but I promise I'll work every day to build the life you deserve." Willa turned in his arms and cupped his face in her hands. "You already have given me everything. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me safety when I was terrified. You gave me love when I thought I'd never feel anything but grief again." She kissed him softly. "You are everything I need, Thomas Parker." "And you are everything I need, Willa Parker," Thomas replied, his voice rough with emotion. They made love that night for the first time, tender and passionate and full of promise. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, talking about their dreams and plans until they fell asleep in each other's arms. The next 2 weeks passed quickly. Willa settled into married life with surprising ease. She continued to work for Mrs. Chen during the day, but now she came home to her own cabin every evening, to her husband and the life they were building together. Thomas worked long hours on the ranch, but he always made time for Willa, whether it was sharing a meal together or taking an evening walk or simply sitting by the fire and talking. They were happy in a way that felt almost miraculous given how they had met and how quickly everything had happened. But it also felt inevitable, as if they had been meant to find each other, meant to build this life together. The day of the trial arrived too quickly. Marshal Hayes sent word that Willa needed to be in Lincoln, the county seat, to testify. Thomas insisted on accompanying her, and Mrs. Chen sent Diego and Samuel as extra protection. The journey to Lincoln took most of a day, and they arrived at the courthouse just as the sun was setting. The trial was set to begin the next morning, and the marshal had arranged for them to stay in a boarding house near the courthouse. That night, Willa couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about facing the men who had killed her father, about having to relive that terrible day in front of a courtroom full of strangers. Thomas held her close, murmuring reassurances, but even his presence couldn't completely ease her anxiety. The courthouse was packed the next morning. Apparently, word had spread about the trial, and everyone wanted to see justice done to Jack Mercer and his gang. Willa sat in the front row with Thomas beside her, his hand gripping hers tightly. When the defendants were brought in, Willa's breath caught. There they were, the three men who had destroyed her life. The one with the scar, the one missing fingers, the one with the black hat and silver band. They looked smaller somehow, less terrifying in the light of day and surrounded by armed lawmen. But the hatred in their eyes when they saw her was very real. The trial lasted 3 days. Willa testified on the first day, telling her story clearly and calmly despite the way her hands shook. The defense attorney tried to rattle her, suggesting she might have been mistaken, that the trauma had confused her memory. But Willa stood firm, and her testimony was damning. Other witnesses testified as well. Homesteaders who had been threatened by Mercer's gang, people who had seen them around the territory. Marshall Hayes presented evidence of the gang's crimes spanning back years. The case against them was overwhelming. On the third day, the jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts for all three men. The judge sentenced them to hang, and the courtroom erupted in cheers. Willa felt Thomas's arms around her, heard his voice saying, "It's over, sweetheart. It's finally over." And it was. The weight that had been pressing on her chest since her father's death finally lifted. She had gotten justice for him. She had done what needed to be done. Now she could truly move forward. They returned to the Diamond Cross to find Mrs. Chen and her children waiting anxiously for news. When they heard about the guilty verdicts, there was much celebration. That night, Mrs. Chen prepared a special supper, and they all toasted to justice and new beginnings. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. Thomas and Willa worked hard and saved their money, planning for the day when they could start building their own house on the land Mrs. Chen had sold them. It was a beautiful piece of property, with a view of the mountains and a small stream running through it. 6 months after their wedding, Willa realized she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening after supper, and the look of pure joy on his face made her cry happy tears. "We're going to have a baby," Thomas said wonderingly, his hand resting on her still flat belly. "A baby, Willa." "Are you happy?" Willa asked, though she could see he was. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Thomas said. He kissed her deeply. "You've given me everything, Willa. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I never thought I'd have any of this." "We're giving it to each other," Willa corrected gently. The pregnancy was not easy. Willa was sick most mornings for the first few months, and as she grew larger, the work became more difficult. But Mrs. Chen was understanding, adjusting Willa's duties to accommodate her condition. And Thomas was attentive and caring, always making sure Willa was comfortable and had everything she needed. They spent the winter making preparations, building a cradle and sewing baby clothes. Emily was excited to have a baby on the ranch and volunteered to help with childcare once the baby arrived. Even the younger Chen children were eager to meet the new addition. In early April of 1883, on a warm spring evening, Willa went into labor. Mrs. Chen and Emily attended her while Thomas paced anxiously outside the cabin. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. But finally, as the sun reached its peak, a baby's cry filled the cabin. "It's a boy," Mrs. Chen announced, opening the door. "You have a son, Thomas." Thomas rushed inside to find Willa exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. The baby had dark hair like his father and was squalling lustily. "He's perfect," Thomas breathed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and looking down at his son with wonder. "We need to name him," Willa said softly. They had discussed names for months but hadn't been able to decide. Now, looking at their son, Thomas said, "What about William?" "After your father, William Parker." Fresh tears filled Willa's eyes. "You do that. Your father saved your life," Thomas said seriously. "He gave me the greatest gift I've ever received by making sure you survived. It seems right to honor him this way." "William Thomas Parker," Willa said, testing the name. "I like it. I like it very much." Little William was a healthy, happy baby who quickly became the center of their world. Thomas was a natural father, gentle and patient, and he doted on his son. Willa loved watching them together, seeing the way Thomas's face softened when he held William, hearing the silly songs he sang to make the baby smile. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter into the world. Grace Elizabeth Parker was born with her mother's blonde hair and her father's green eyes, and she was just as perfect as her brother. William, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. By then, Thomas and Willa had begun building their house on their own land. It wasn't a mansion, but it was solid and spacious, with a big kitchen like Willa had always dreamed of and enough bedrooms for their growing family. They moved in when Grace was 6 months old, and Willa cried as she walked through the rooms, unable to believe this was really theirs. "Remember when you said you had nothing to offer me?" Thomas asked that first night in their new home, as they stood on the porch watching the sunset. "I remember," Willa said, holding Grace while William played at their feet. "You were so wrong," Thomas said, wrapping his arm around her. "You had everything I needed, everything I ever wanted, a partner, a friend, a love that makes every day worth living. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to keep fighting for something better. And you gave me hope when I had none," Willa replied, leaning into him. "You caught me when I was falling, and you've been holding me up ever since." "Always will," Thomas promised. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. They added 2 more children to their family, twin boys named Henry and Samuel, born in 1887. The Diamond Cross prospered, and so did the Parker family. Thomas became one of the most respected ranchers in the territory, known for his fairness and his skill with horses. Willa became known for her kindness and her cooking, and their home was always open to those who needed help. They never forgot where they had come from or how close they had both come to losing everything. Every year on the anniversary of the day they met, they rode back to that spot in White Oaks where Thomas had caught Willa as she fell. It became their tradition, a way of remembering and being grateful for the chance encounter that had changed both their lives. Mrs. Chen remained a close friend and almost a mother figure to Willa. Emily grew up and married Samuel, the ranch hand, and they built a home on the Diamond Cross land as well. The Chen children and the Parker children grew up together like cousins, running wild across the ranch and learning the ways of the West. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Willa with a beautiful garden. He had spent months preparing it in secret, building raised beds and a white picket fence, planting roses and wildflowers and all of Willa's favorite plants. "You said you always wanted a garden full of flowers," Thomas said as he led her to it blindfolded, then removed the cloth from her eyes. "So I made you one." Willa burst into tears at the sight of it, so beautiful and thoughtful and perfect. "I love it. I love you." "I love you too," Thomas said, pulling her close. "More now than I did 10 years ago, which I wouldn't have thought possible." They stood there in the garden, surrounded by the flowers and the life they had built, and Willa thought about how far they had both come. From 2 broken people with nothing left to lose, they had created something beautiful and lasting. They had built not just a home but a legacy, a family that would continue long after they were gone. Their children grew strong and healthy. William, the eldest, was quiet and thoughtful like his mother, with a gift for working with animals. Grace was bold and adventurous, always getting into mischief but impossible not to love. The twins, Henry and Samuel, were inseparable and constantly competing with each other, but in a good-natured way. Thomas taught his sons to ride and rope and work the land. He taught them to be honest and fair, to stand up for what was right even when it was hard. Willa taught her daughter to cook and sew and manage a household, but also to be strong and independent, to never depend entirely on anyone else. "The world is changing," Willa told Grace one day when her daughter was 15. "Women are starting to have more choices, more opportunities. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you're limited by being a woman. You can do anything you set your mind to." "You did," Grace observed. "You survived something terrible and built something wonderful." "With your father's help," Willa said. "That's the key, Grace. Find someone who sees you as a partner, not a possession. Someone who wants to build something with you, not just have you take care of them." Grace took that advice to heart, and when she eventually married, it was to a young rancher named Michael Brooks who treated her as an equal and respected her strength. The years rolled on. New Mexico achieved statehood in 1912, and the Parkers celebrated along with everyone else. The Wild West was becoming less wild, more civilized. Towns grew into cities, railroads connected distant places, and the old lawless days became stories told to children. Thomas and Willa grew older together, their dark hair turning gray, their faces lined with years of sun and laughter. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper and richer with time, like wine aging in a barrel. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents. Their children spread out across the territory but always came home for holidays and celebrations. The Parker Ranch became a gathering place, a center of love and stability for multiple generations. On a warm evening in the spring of 1925, Thomas and Willa sat together on the porch of the house he had built for her over 40 years earlier. They were both in their 70s now, moving slower than they once did but still sharp and engaged with life. "You ever regret it?" Willa asked suddenly. "Taking a chance on a desperate woman you found in the street?" Thomas looked at her in surprise. "Not for a single second. That was the best decision I ever made." "Why do you ask?" "Because I want you to know that you saved my life that day," Willa said. "Not just from dying in the desert, but from giving up on everything. You showed me that even when you've lost everything, you can still find joy and love and purpose. You taught me that endings can also be beginnings." "You saved my life too," Thomas said, taking her hand. "I was just going through the motions before I met you, working and existing but not really living. You gave me a reason to dream again, a reason to build something lasting. You made me whole, Willa." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same colors it had been that first evening by the creek when Thomas had told her he was falling in love with her. "We did good, didn't we?" Willa said eventually. "With our life, with our children, with everything we built here, we did great," Thomas confirmed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." "I'm glad I fell that day in White Oaks," Willa said with a smile, "and I'm glad you were there to catch me." "I'll always catch you," Thomas promised, the same words he had spoken to her 43 years earlier. They continued to live in their home, surrounded by family and the land they loved, for several more years. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1928 at the age of 73, with Willa holding his hand. She grieved deeply, but without regret, knowing they had lived a full and beautiful life together. Willa lived on for another 5 years, helping to raise grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories about the old days and the Wild West as it used to be. She never remarried, saying that she had found her great love and nothing else would ever compare. She died in the spring of 1933, on a warm April day much like the one when she had first stumbled into White Oaks with nothing but desperation and hope. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her bed, and her last words were, "Tell your father I'm coming. Tell him I'm ready to see him again." They buried Willa next to Thomas on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains and the sunset. The headstone read, Thomas Parker, 1855–1928, Willa Parker, 1861–1933, beloved husband and wife, parents, grandparents, you have everything I need. Their story became a legend in the family, passed down through generations. The story of how a desperate woman with nothing to offer met a kind cowboy who saw everything he needed in her. The story of how two broken people found each other and built something beautiful from the ashes of their losses. The Parker Ranch continued to thrive, operated by their descendants who never forgot the legacy Thomas and Willa had created. The house Thomas built still stood, carefully maintained and treasured. The garden he had made for Willa was still there too, tended lovingly by her granddaughters and great-granddaughters. And sometimes, on warm spring evenings, family members sitting on that old porch swore they could feel the presence of Thomas and Willa, still there in the home they had created, still loving each other across the boundaries of death itself. Because some loves are too strong to be contained by a single lifetime. Some loves echo through the ages, inspiring and uplifting everyone they touch. And the love between Thomas and Willa Parker was exactly that kind of love, a love that had started with a desperate woman falling and a kind man catching her, and had grown into something that would last forever. Their great-great-grandchildren still told the story, gathered around dinner tables and campfires. They told about the day Willa Bradford stumbled into White Oaks with blood on her hands and desperation in her heart. They told about Thomas Parker, who caught her when she fell and saw not what she had lost, but what she could become. They told about how Willa said, "I have nothing to offer you," and how Thomas replied, "You have everything I need." And they told about how those words became the foundation of a love that built a legacy, a love that proved that even in the hardest times, even when you've lost everything, hope can find you. Love can find you, and a single moment of kindness can change everything. The Wild West was gone, tamed and civilized and turned into something new. But the story of Thomas and Willa Parker lived on, a reminder that the most important thing anyone can do is to catch someone when they're falling and show them that they are worth saving, that they have value and purpose, and everything needed to build a beautiful life. Because in the end, that's what Thomas did for Willa, and what Willa did for Thomas. They saved each other, not with grand gestures or heroic acts, but with simple kindness and genuine love. They saw each other, truly saw each other, and recognized that they had found something precious. And from that recognition, from that mutual seeing and valuing, they built a love story that would echo through time, inspiring everyone who heard it to believe in second chances, in the power of kindness, and in the enduring strength of true love. The sun set over the Parker Ranch, as it had for over 100 years, painting the sky in brilliant colors. And somewhere in that sunset, if you believed the family stories, you could still see Thomas and Willa riding together toward home, toward each other, toward the love that had defined their lives and would define their legacy forever.